Okay, so now if I double click on this green connection cone, you'll notice that there's no intelligence or properties in here that I could come in and manipulate or control. It's just a static connection, so in order for me to use this the way that it is right now, I would have to have the exact same column, the exact same beam, and it would produce the exact same conditions that you see here on the screen. So what we're going to do is go in and edit the custom component and give it properties and bindings so that we can control this and use it in different scenarios, but basically using the same general platform. So in order to do that, I'm going to select the green cone, come down, right click, and go to edit custom component. And what this will do is it will open up 4 views that I can use to edit my custom component. Now if you aren't careful, you could click out and begin working in a different view other than these. That will cause problems with editing the custom component. So to be sure, or to be safe, you could close any other views that you have besides these 4, but just be aware that you do need to do all of your work within these within these windows. Okay, so let's go ahead and define a few things. Let me drag this toolbar over here. This right here is the custom component editor, and these first 4 buttons are used to create and define distances and work planes. The next button here will create construction lines that you could use if needed within the custom component. This pull down here allows you to select different types of planes to work with. The orange circle with the check mark reopens the original custom component dialog box, and this next box over here we'll take a look at several times as we use this, but it opens up the variable dialog box to create and define values that can be shown in the custom dialog box. And this blue icon right here is for opening the model browser to see the parts that make up the component. And these last 3 buttons right here are different save options. So I'll be referencing those as we add and tweak this component. And then you have the custom component browser right here, which contains all of the information associated with this custom component. If I click on the plus sign, you'll be able to see here the input objects. I have my primary part and my secondary part, that being the column and the beam. And then I have all of the parts that make up my component, the contour plates, both of them, the fitting that's cutting the column, both bolt groups, and the 4 individual welds. Okay, so what we're going to do now is go ahead and begin adding in bindings, which is going to link these work points to the different aspects of this connection. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And let me drag this over. And as I create bindings, it's going to place them in this dialog box. So let me put this up, and I'll just go ahead and do one just so that we can see what's going on here. In order to do this, you need to grab the handles of the component. So just to show you these, I'm going to grab the 3 handles of this fitting. Let me situate these so we can, and let me move this one down. Perhaps that will be a little bit better there. Okay, so I'm gonna select those, right click, and choose bind to plane. And the plane right now that I have this set to is component plane. So you can see that if I hover my mouse, it's gonna give me different planes that I can bind to. And every handle needs to be bound in 3 directions, the X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to go ahead and bind this to this plane right here, all of 3 of these. So I'll just click, and you'll notice that it adds in D1, D2, and D3. These are the bindings for each of those handles. D stands for distance, so these distance variables are created by binding. There's also something else you could see in here called a parameter, which would be P1, P2, etc., which will be added using this button, which will allow us more functionality and flexibility within our actual components. So when we get to that stage in the game, I'll discuss that more.
So a good example of the bindings, or a good analogy for the bindings, is it's almost like the glue that that makes one object react with another object. Like for instance, that D1 binding there, is currently set to like 3'3" and change there. That's always going to be held to that distance. So that control point there is always going to be 3'3" and 3/8 or so away from the plane that it is bound to.
Right, so I'm going to go ahead and bind these in another direction, going this way. And then for my last direction, I'm going to change this up here to be boundary planes. And I'll right click and go to bind plane, and I'll rotate this view, and you'll see that the surfaces that I hover over give me the different options of what I can bind to. And I'm going to bind this to the underside of the beam, so that the fitting, my column, will always be cut to the underside of the beam, no matter if the profile changes or anything like that.
So every binding you see there, for those 3 points, there are now 3 bindings per point. One in the X, one in the Y, and one in the Z axis. So again, you want to bind everything in 3 points.
Okay. So that's kind of the basics there. It is best, if you can, to stay with boundary planes and component planes. These other planes, excuse me, the center planes would be like the center lines of the part of the custom component. The outline planes would be the outer and inner surfaces of a profile. You could imagine the top or bottom of a flange or the sides of the web. And the cut planes would be basically the planes that follow the faces of the cuts or the fittings. So those are what those are, and depending on your situation, you'll use one or the other. So I'm going to go ahead and add in the bindings for all of the rest of these parts that we need. And as I add the bindings, this list will be populated. We'll take a look at it at the end, but I'm going to go ahead and close it now, just so that we can see more clearly in this 3D view what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and bind the contour plates. I'm just going to start with these handles here. Then I'm just going to hold down Alt and Windows select these. And right now it's on boundary planes, so I can right click and bind the plane. I'm going to choose this column here, and then I'm going to choose the underside of the beam, which is going to bind these there. And then I'll switch this up here to component planes, and I'm going to do this. If I rotate this, you can see that it's right there in the center of the plane. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. So I have those handles are taken care of. I'll go ahead and do the same down here, binding to that component plane, changing to boundary planes, and I'll select the face of the column and the underside of the beam again, and repeat similar fashion for these right here.
So while Lee's doing that and just continuing with those bindings, it's worthwhile noting that when you're making these custom components, that you want to think a little bit beforehand about what you want, how you want the component to behave, because that's going to go a long way into determining what gets bound to what, and how the actual component gets constructed.
Yeah. Going along with that, the way that I did model these in is, you see when I highlight, I modeled these in as contour plates, is that we're going to define a variable for the user to define the spacing here. And I have my bindings on the inside, so that the bind is from this handle on the inside to the center of the column. So when we create our variable, we can just create an equal space, and it will just fluctuate that way. Now, what I'm going to do here is I need some help to bind this handle right here to keep these consistent. So I'm just going to load some beam properties here, and I just call it binding help, and I just have a simple little profile, and let me just model these in. And what I'm going to do is just model in these plates coming from this handle here to the underside of the beam. And let me just tweak this right here. I'll set this to middle, top, and left.
So this is one technique you can use whereby you're almost creating a dummy member which won't feature in any of the component, but it just gives you some extra assistance in creating a plane or something like that, just to make the actual creation of the component easier.
Yeah. And I'm modeling this with matching the same handles, so that the distance here, this 1 foot 11 binding, I'll be able to apply the same thing here and control them. But what I'm going to do is create with these plates an intersection right here of these points. So let me place that in. So now I can bind to these faces here to control these handles. So I'll go ahead and jump back.